Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben, I think we had this exact same conversation a year ago, but I want to offer a blanket apology to everyone that was forced to watch the Patriots-Jets game on Sunday.
Yeah. Well, I apologize to anyone who watches Zach Wilson do anything, the Jets quarterback.
Zach Wilson, your quarterback. My quarterback allegedly slapped your cornerback in the balls.
There's video of it. I mean, it's not allegedly. We can see the evidence. It's like Donald Trump in his classified documents.
Not covered in glory.
No.
That game. I was luckily on a plane, so it was one of those really small TVs. I was coming back from a wedding in Wisconsin.
Yeah,
Iowa crew.
I'm avoiding the Jets. I can't. I don't have the stomach for it.
I think that's right. Well, we got a lot of news today to distract us from terrible sports franchises. We are going to cover the foreign policy implications of the indictment of Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, the latest from Russia and Ukraine, a correction, an important one from the New York Times about Ron DeSantis and his work at Guantanamo Bay prison, an update on the diplomatic row between Canada and India. I love saying row. It feels very British.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about debatably the worst vetting mistake of all time in politics. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, did an interview with Fox News. We'll talk about sanctions and migration, quick update on Niger, some news about undiplomatic ambassadors. And then, Ben, you did today's interview. What are we going to hear about?
Yeah, so I talked to Olesya Vartanyan, who's the International Crisis Group senior analyst for the region that includes Armenia and Azerbaijan. So we talked about the situation there where you have essentially the 150,000 ethnic Armenians who've been living in this enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, that they've been starved for months and then essentially militarily defeated and are being driven from their homes as we speak. So there's like essentially a mass ethnic cleansing of these people moving into Armenia. And so we talked about how that happened, why that happened, what's going to happen next, what the United States and the international community can do, cement the powers there as we speak, and really get some important texture from the ground to what it feels like, what life is like for these people that are on this unimaginable exile journey out of their homeland forever. I mean, I think the main takeaway, Tommy, for me is like this is pretty well done, and it just happened in like a week.
Happened so fast.
And there was a slow motion buildup, and people will say they've been warning about this all year, and they have. So I don't want to diminish that, but this end play happened in a week.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, you and I were just talking before we started recording. I mean, we covered this a week or two ago. And there was what seemed like a sliver of good news because the only road from Armenia into Nagorno-Karabakh had been opened up by Azerbaijan. People thought maybe to get aid in, but it turns out the Azerbaijanis just rolled in their troops and used this as a pretext to invade. And, this really, I mean, there have been on and off wars in Nagorno-Karabakh for decades. Yeah. But, it seems like the die was cast in, 2020 when Azerbaijan took back a lot of territory?
Yeah, I think what we learned from that is Azerbaijan is just much, much more stronger militarily than Armenia for a lot of reasons, including a military buildup funded by oil. But also what's happened this time is the Russian peacekeepers weren't there to break it up, So it's also a story about, diminishing Russian influence in that part of the world.
Yeah. Let's start with the now former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez. So last week, Bob Menendez was charged with 3 counts of using his official office to do favors in exchange for bribes. That include hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, gold bars, Ben, a Mercedes. I think there were some mortgage payments for Menendez and his wife. There's a couple different strands of corruption here, so I'll just try to lay them out quickly. Menendez allegedly called a senior official of the Department of Agriculture in an attempt to protect his friend's monopoly on imported halal meat to Egypt. That's part 1. Part 2, Menendez is accused of pushing Biden to install a U.S. attorney in New Jersey that he thought he could control, and then tried to interfere in the prosecution of an associate in exchange for cash. But the biggest piece of this from our perspective is that Menendez took bribes from an intermediary on behalf of the Egyptian government, the military and intel guys, I believe specifically, in exchange for helping increase U.S. military assistance to Egypt. Some of the things specifically that Menendez did include passing along detailed information about the staffing of the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, like the number of U.S. or American staffers and local staff. Menendez apparently drafted a letter for the Egyptian government to use to send to his Senate colleagues to try to unblock aid, like to help them figure out the best arguments that all got routed through his girlfriend, then wife. And then, for listeners, remember that Egypt is the second largest recipient of U.S. military aid after Israel. And these alleged bribes to Menendez came at a time when aid to Egypt was held up over human rights concerns. Some listeners might be thinking, Ben, like, what the hell can a random guy from New Jersey do to influence foreign military sales? Yeah, the answer is a lot. If said guy is or woman is chairman or ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, those folks can put a hold on foreign military sales. They can lean on the White House to do more. They can generally impact, personnel and policy. So, Ben, there's a lot to this one, but let's just sort of like take a beat and talk about what we just discussed. I mean, the allegations are part old school corruption, but like he's also acting as a foreign agent in some sense for the Egyptian government. Like, I don't want to use the word treason. That's obviously that's not what this is. I saw some people saying that on Twitter, but it's like he is acting on behalf of a not all that friendly government, providing them non-public information. I mean, this is really bad. This is worse than just taking bribes to me.
Yeah. And we'll get to the second part of that, which is Menendez's impact on foreign policy generally, and Latin America policy particularly. But starting on the Egypt piece of it, this is pretty astonishing stuff because, first of all, as you said, this is like not public information that he's providing. It's, sensitive information in a lot of ways, right? The staffing of the embassy, for instance. But I think even more egregious is the role he's playing essentially as a lobbyist for the Egyptian government. What you describe is what a lobbyist does.
Yes.
Here's how you write a letter to the senators to make it most likely that you get this funding released.
You have to register under FARA.
Yes.
To do it, the Foreign Agent Registration Act.
And what is particularly grotesque about this is that Bob Menendez consistently puts himself forward as this champion of democracy and human rights around the world, And here he is helping a brutal dictatorship in Egypt that has tens of thousands of political prisoners, that routinely has its funding scrutinized and held up by Congress because of its violations of human rights. And,
for example, turning the military on protesters and killing hundreds of people.
Yeah. And so this guy is simultaneously mouthing words about human rights while literally helping a dictatorship lobby to maintain billions of dollars assistance despite human rights issues. And that is both corrupt, and it is also like the most cynical thing I can think about, because it's what everybody thinks the United States is full of shit. Like, oh, we talk about these things, but then we scratch the backs of these dictatorships. That's literally what he's doing, and he's doing it for payment. So it's like everything in one scandal that is sucks about American foreign policy. It's corrupted, it's hypocritical, it's cozy with dictators, like everything is in this one indictment of this guy. And look, this will lead in the second part of the discussion. Like, everybody knows and has known for a long time that Bob Menendez is corrupt. There's just been this why was he the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee? Why was he allowed to have this kind of influence on American foreign policy, given that this guy, maybe people didn't know the extent of this Egypt thing, but I mean, he
was indicted in 2015.
Barely beat the rap in 2015. Look, I know innocent until proven guilty,
right.
But like, it's not exactly a secret in Washington that Bob Menendez plays pretty close to the sun on corruption issues.
Yeah, and we should say, Menendez denies these allegations. He says he won't resign. His defense is basically like, look, I was just doing what anyone would do for their constituents. That's what senators do all day, every day. You fight for businesses in your district or whatever. He suggested that this cash that was found is his own money that he took out of the bank, and that he took out huge wads of cash because he was scarred by his family's experience in Cuba, I guess, sort of pre-Castro.
Wait a second, though. Time out on that one. That's what he said. His family never lived in Cuba under Castro. like he's fucking full of shit. It's just like Rubio's story about this guy,
General Rubio.
Sorry, Menendez's family left Cuba before the revolution. So when he says like we have the fear of communism in our family and therefore I like having cash out, that's not true. He's making up a story. Like I'm sorry, like playing that card in this case doesn't make any sense.
Well, yeah. He also suggested that he's just being targeted because he's Latino, which also I've not seen any evidence of that. Well, so Ben, let's talk about the foreign policy implications that you hinted at. Last week, the Biden administration announced temporary protected status for nearly 500,000 Venezuelan migrants currently in the U.S. That means the people that entered the U.S. before July 31st, they can apply for work permits. Administration officials say that they extended TPS, I think, for 18 months in this case, to these Venezuelans because the situation in Venezuela is deteriorating. I'm sure they're also worried that cities like New York are loudly complaining about the fact that they can't manage the influx of migrants. There's nowhere to house people. They can't feed them. They can't
work.
Healthcare, right? So you can't work. So this is a no-brainer to me. Let people work if they're here, right? Let them make money, or else how else are they going to live? But, as we've discussed on the show many times, you don't hear a lot of debate in Washington about how to alleviate the root causes of migration in places like Venezuela, including, the causes like U.S. sanctions. Here's a clip from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about how U.S. sanctions have helped create the migration crisis on the southern border.
If we are constantly engaging in foreign policy that drives people to our southern border. In this specific instance, U.S. sanctions that were originally authored by Marco Rubio began and precipitated, certainly took a large part in the driving of populations to our southern border. Shortly after those sanctions, those broad-based sanctions.
You're talking about Venezuela?
Yes. Shortly after those broad-based sanctions were enacted, we started seeing dramatic increases in these populations that were coming to our southern border. And so we have to address the root of these population movements and the migration crisis, and we also have to address the domestic U.S. policy issues when it comes to immigration reform.
So Ben, she mentions Rubio. I mean, you could put Bob Menendez in the same bucket where he's hardline on Venezuela. He's super hawkish on Iran. He's super hawkish on Cuba. He opposed, President Obama even visiting Cuba or, extending any sort of olive branch. But again, good for AOC for talking about how sanctions are playing a role in driving the migration crisis.
Yeah, no, really, really good for her to raise the visibility. This is a great issue for her to speak out on. And just so people understand how this works, Bob Menendez is the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So the reason he's had such a hugely outsized role in Latin America policy, mainly hardline policies towards Venezuela and Cuba. So all these sanctions that have punished the people of those countries while doing nothing to bring a positive change, while driving hundreds of thousands of people to our borders in humanitarian crisis. He's able to do that because he's weaponized his chairmanship. And what do I mean by that? It's well known that if you touch Cuba, you're never going to get confirmed for any ambassadorship, any Senate confirmed position.
Meaning
right?
if you have not a hawkish position you're for dialogue.
I don't want to name names, but there are people who just because they worked with me on that Cuba opening, even though they were just doing the policy of the administration at the time, they have not been able to advance in their careers because Bob Menendez, it's very clear
won't confirm them.
That he won't confirm them, right? But even beyond that, I think the Biden administration has internalized Bob Menendez will actually mess with all of our confirmations if we change Cuba policy or Venezuela policy. He was willing to weaponize, almost like Tommy Tuberville style. He'll just hold up all your ambassadors if he doesn't like what you do in Cuba.
And by the way, when he was prosecuted in 2015 and then got off because of the hung jury, he literally gave a speech where he was like, "To those people who hung with me, I'll remember you, and to those who didn't, I'll never forget you." He's vindictive in public about it.
He is famous for a grudge. And if I sound like it's personal for me, it is. But I think it's also wrong what he does because he, more than any senator that I encountered, certainly any Democrat that I encountered, he would carry these grudges and he would take things out on civil servants and he would, again, weaponize his position. It's make your argument, but, he refuses to allow there to be alternative views. So if you want to know why Latin America policy is so distorted and dumb, it's because it's been made in fear of this guy. And frankly, we benefited. He was booted from the chairmanship when we did the Cuba opening because he was under a different prosecution. So we would have done anyway, but it coincidentally was easier for us. Coincidentally, by the way, conspiracy theorist, I had no idea what the fucking prosecution of Bob Menendez was. But that's the first point. This hopefully is an opportunity for the Biden people to say, okay, without this guy chairing this committee, now we can have a more rational approach that tries to end Venezuela's humanitarian crisis. Now we can have a different Cuba policy that stops punishing people and driving them to our borders. That's the opportunity that's open up here. I will say, just because I saw one thing when I came in here, Tommy, on the broader migration issue, I saw a non-friend of the pod, Suella Braverman, give this speech at AEI.
From the big Boris Johnson fan over in the British government.
She's like the hard-ass anti-immigrant home secretary, where she said basically we have to get rid of the UN Convention on Refugees. No, the problem is that we don't have agreements like that work. So the point is that Biden took the right step, but it's ad hoc. Everything around immigration in this country and in Europe are these kind of ad hoc responses to surges. So now the Venezuelans can work, but everybody else can't. It's the right step, but it also kind of points out how broken this entire infrastructure is, our own policies and the international policies here. And what we really need is an effort to fix those.
Yeah, and I think so often these discussions politically get driven by these sort of narrow political considerations in Florida, right? Like we can't get rid of the embargo with Cuba because hardline Cubans will vote Republican. We can't, try to take a different approach with Venezuela because the big Venezuelan community in Florida will oppose that. Listen, that's true. But at some point, I would like to manage those politics, take a different approach that might actually address the problem on the border. And if there are hardliners who oppose trying to make life better for Venezuelans so people want to stay in Venezuela, then you accuse them of exacerbating the border crisis, right? Like we got to go on offense here. I'm much more worried about the politics of immigration than I am people saying that we need to keep the embargo going on Cuba.
No, it's such a good point because it's both that kind of dumb DC mindset where at some point everybody decided that you had to be afraid of the right-wing politics in Florida on this. And that's outdated, first of all, because Florida's not really a swing state anymore. But also what that misses is it's the Republican strategy to create this chaos, to underfund asylum judges, to sanction places. Yep. They want to create migration crises so that they can then kind of blame government for failing to solve those crises. And if you prevent yourself from solving those crises because you're afraid to lift sanctions on Venezuela, well, you may think you're avoiding short-term political pain, but you're inviting much bigger medium and long-term pain. Like the best politics is actually to solve the problem. And often in foreign policy, that means taking a short-term hit in exchange for a medium and long-term outcome. And that's what I really hope we see on Latin America, because this policy is ripe to change on Cuba, on Venezuela, on a whole host of things, on drugs. And maybe if Bob Menendez is out of the way, that'll become easier.
I saw an NPR story the other day about 3, I think, Nigerian men who stowed away on a massive ship, on the keel of the ship, right? So they're outdoor explosive elements on a constantly moving keel of a ship for 14 days because they were so desperate to get out of Nigeria and get to somewhere else. They ended up in Brazil. The point being, you're never going to talk people out of trying to leave countries when they are in desperate circumstances.
No, this is why this
is so true in Venezuela.
Yeah, this is why this Suella Braverman speech triggered me, because there she is at AEI talking about using all means necessary to stop these boats in the English Channel. You're talking about
killing innocent people.
Afghan families crossing the channel like in little boats, and you're talking about like using all means necessary. Fix the problem. Do your job. Yeah. It's really frustrating. And all these people that demagogue this issue while creating the issue through their own policies. It is like a terrible feedback loop.
So it's wretched people. Let's turn to Ukraine and Russian news, Ben, because there's lots of updates on that front. So last Friday, Ukraine carried out an attack on Russia's naval fleet. They struck a key command and communications center in Crimea. That strike, they said, killed a guy named Vietor Sokolov, the commander of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, along with 33 other officers. It's not clear if that's true, because on Tuesday, the Russian Ministry of Defense put out a video that purported to show Sokolov alive, but, we'll find out. I guess time will tell. Either way, the Ukrainians keep hammering Russia's naval fleet. In response, the Russians targeted an important grain facility in Odessa. They're continuing this sort of war on Ukraine's ability to feed the world. On the southern front of the war, Ukrainian troops have punched through Russia's defensive line, the Surovkin line, which is this multi-layered defensive line constructed by the Russian forces to prevent Ukrainian advances. Now they're going to see if they can widen that breach, advance through it, and build on it. The U.S. apparently has agreed at the end of last week, when Zelensky was here, to give Ukraine these long-range U.S. missiles called ATACMS that they've wanted for a long time. It sounds like those will include cluster munitions on them, so another sort of example of that convention going away. The U.S. made M1 Abrams tanks are finally in Ukraine. Hopefully that'll help with this offensive, though, Ben, I heard a military expert say the other day that the average lifespan of a tank in combat is usually less than 2 weeks. before they are damaged or destroyed. So it just goes to the churn and why
Yeah.
the Ukrainians wanted 300 and we gave them 31 and they don't think that's enough.
Yeah.
But some limited progress again by the Ukrainian side. But unfortunately now these exhausted Ukrainian troops have to fight their way to the next set of mines, to the next set of fortified defenses, and it's going to continue to be a brutal slog. But anything else you sort of saw out there this week on that front?
No, I mean, I think that's right. There are these 3 lines of Russian defenses, right? And it's just a slog, clearly, to get through them. And that suggests more likely than not, like some version of a stalemate for a while. The attack on the Russian naval, that's characteristic of a couple of things. One, the Ukrainians hitting Crimea more, and 2, this kind of almost like targeted assassination. They seemed like they were going after this guy. Like we said, that's them trying to reach beyond that front line because they're unable to make a lot of progress there and try to kind of change the trajectory of the war that way. One thing I did just note, Tommy, is that Elon Musk had apparently denied Starlink access to Ukraine because he thought that if they attacked the Russian fleet, it would start like World War III. And Elon Musk's escalation risk analysis
not quite spot on
because they're hitting all the same stuff anyway, and there's not nuclear weapons being used in response. So that is notable.
Yeah. And in case we all need a reminder of the fact that Vladimir Putin is not just brutalizing the Ukrainians, but he's brutalizing a lot of his own people. An opposition leader and activist named Vladimir Kara-Murza has reportedly been transferred to a maximum security prison in Siberia. He got sentenced to 25 years in prison for denouncing the Russian invasion. This is another sort of brave activist who was, again, poisoned twice, once in 2015 and once in 2017.
I met that guy, and he'd recently been poisoned. He also wrote for the Washington Post. And so, I mean, actually, this is like the, Khashoggi, our buddy Jason Resign before that. The Post has had some people, just a reminder, this guy wasn't a conventional journalist, but just the dangers that some people are facing for things that would have been totally normal to be doing like 10 years ago.
Yeah, just voicing your opinion. So I want to get to this DeSantis thing, Ben, because a while back we covered allegations made by a former detainee at Guantanamo Bay prison about Ron DeSantis. It's a guy named Mansour Adiafi. He alleged that DeSantis, while working as a junior officer in the military, he's a JAG at Gitmo, was part of a group that force-fed him to break a hunger strike. The New York Times looked into these allegations and found no evidence to back up the claims. Instead, they were repeatedly told by people who worked with DeSantis or worked at Gitmo that this almost certainly did not happen because DeSantis was very junior and very inexperienced, and a young lawyer wouldn't be anywhere near a force feeding. That doesn't mean that the force feedings did not happen. They very much did, and many other horrible things happened to these detainees. But DeSantis doesn't seem to have witnessed or participated in this process in any way. DeSantis did get, sort of detailed to Gitmo for these 1 to 2 week stints. His job was described as being equivalent to a first-year associate at a law firm, making copies, kind of menial stuff. But in the past, DeSantis has defended Gitmo. And, I think when we covered this at the time, we played an interview he did with a Florida outlet where, he suggested that this force feeding was just a way to combat ongoing jihad by detainees. He talked about, essentially their resistance to interrogation, et cetera, is an affront to him and not, mistreatment of these detainees. But an important correction and clarification here.
Yeah, and it's important to get those facts straight. At the same time, I think the real scandal here, which is kind of lost in American politics now, is that one, Gitmo happened, and all this torture and force feeding and waterboarding happened. 2, that people like Ron DeSantis continue to defend it as if it was a good thing that happened. Right. And then 3, that it's still open, and that we we're paying God knows how much money a year to keep 50 people down there. So to me, it doesn't really raise the basic. But the problem is that probably every Republican candidate would defend Gitmo. So it doesn't set DeSantis apart as uniquely sadistic that he does so.
Yeah, that's true. Well, another big update. So last week we talked about these shocking allegations that were made by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that agents of the Indian government carried out an assassination of a Sikh separatist on Canadian soil, Canadian citizen. The Indian government angrily denied those accusations, but Canada also took a bunch of steps. They expelled an Indian intelligence operative who was living in Canada. The Indian government responded in kind. So we're now learning more about how the Canadians figured this out in the first place. They reportedly intercepted communications between Indian diplomats talking about the assassination. And as I think you sort of mentioned last week, Ben, the U.S. reportedly provided some intelligence to the Canadian government that helped them figure out what happened. It sounded like basically, the Canadians informed us that, or went public with this, and the U.S. intelligence community looked probably back into a big stack of intercepted communications, rifled through it, and gave them stuff that was helpful. Jake Sullivan, President Biden's national security advisor, was asked about the U.S. response at a White House briefing. Here's a clip.
I'm not going to get into the substance of private diplomatic conversations, but we are in constant contact with our Canadian counterparts. We are consulting with them closely. We support the efforts that they are undertaking in this investigation, and we have also been in touch with the Indian government as well. And I will leave it at that for today, only to say that I have seen in the press some efforts to try to drive a wedge between the United States and Canada on this issue. And I firmly reject the idea that there is a wedge between the U.S. and Canada. We have deep concerns about the allegations, and we would like to see this investigation carried forward and the perpetrators held to account. That is what the United States has stood for from the moment this emerged in public, and we will continue to stand for that until this fully plays its way out.
I'm curious, one, if you're seeing any wedges, and two, if this was a fight between Canada and China, I'm pretty sure what would happen next is the Chinese would find a way to punish Canada, like banning the import of Canadian canola oil, which is what they did in 2018 when there was a diplomatic fight. They banned it for 3 years, like a huge economic hit to the Canadians. But I'm not sure what the Indian government's playbook is going to be. Like, where do you think this one goes?
First of all, Jake is better than anybody I know at saying the absolute rote diplo speak, but making it sound kind of dramatic. I cannot get into the substance of sensitive conversation. There's just kind of a constant. There's like a drama behind it. That's a praise there. But look, I think it was what we talked about last week is that the U.S. had to know about this from the Five Eyes. Those are the 5 countries that have basically open book intelligence sharing: the U.S., Canada, the UK, New Zealand, Australia. And so what was kind of strange to me when it first popped, to get to your point about wedges, when it first came out, the U.S. was kind of it wasn't like a coordinated, everybody go out together and say, we're really alarmed by this, or the Canadians go out first and then the U.S. is ready with like a prepared statement that's like, we're deeply concerned about this. There was kind of we should let the investigation go its way, and one of the reasons I like some other people were like, well, that's an interesting formulation, is precisely because the U.S. probably has a view about what happened here. It'd be interesting if you are a member of Congress, for instance, in the Intelligence Committee, I'd be asking, what is the U.S. intelligence assessment of whether this happened? Because I would guess, and I don't know, I really don't know this, but I would guess that the U.S. has some X degree of confidence that X happened.
Especially Indian diplomats were talking about the assassination in some sort of overt way. It doesn't leave a lot of room.
It doesn't leave a lot of, and what was clearly like a professional hit. It wasn't like a guy got hit by a car. It was like a bunch of gunmen.
And the videotape of the assassination have come out. It shows like this was like kind of military style.
Yeah, it was like a contract style hit, right? So, however, I will say, I think Jake did a lot of good work in that clip to clean this up, or clean up. They may not have thought they may not have intended that, but, it just felt like they didn't want to be leading with that. As you and I have talked about, and this is no disrespect in the world to the wonderful role of NSC spokesperson, but sometimes when like the quote is in the name of the NSC spokesperson, it's not in the name of the president or secretary of state or national advisor.
Lesser than.
It's
usually because it was.
Yeah, and so. I think when Jake, though, comes out and basically says, no, there's no wedge, we're with them, we want to get to the bottom of it, I think that is exactly the right answer.
Yeah.
You could just tell that they weren't looking for this fight with the Indians. And maybe that's the message they wanted to send, that we're going to end up being with the Canadians, but we're going to show that we aren't thrilled that this is happening. Now, where can they help is in terms of what's happening next. So in terms of punishment, the question you asked, India's already indicated they're going to like not allow visas for Canadians to visit India, which, both undermines business, but is kind of mean because I'm sure there's a large Indian diaspora there that, so I would hope that the role the U.S. can play is, I understand that the U.S. is probably not going to beat Modi over the head with this because they have all these other interests with him, but to quietly go to them and be like, don't do this. Let's figure out a way to reach some resolution here that doesn't involve you kind of punishing an ally of ours because you killed somebody there. Hopefully that's the kind of quiet, intense diplomacy that can help the Canadians manage through this.
Well, I wonder if the U.S. will be forced to sanction individuals that we know are associated with this assassination under the Magnitsky Act, or I don't know. It seemed like, I wonder if Congress will force our hand on any sense too.
There really, Modi has a lot of support in Congress too, but there are other issues that are raised by this. So for instance, I think we share intelligence with India, Are there concerns about intelligence sharing with an intelligence service that may have carried out a contract hit in Canada? There are these kinds of incidents raise all these questions, Yeah. And my sense is the administration's trade-offs are probably going to be towards not having a rift with India. But hopefully that can at least include what Jake said, which is getting to the bottom of what happened, being clear about accountability, and addressing this in some fashion.
Our former mayor here in Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, I think was pretty recently confirmed as the U.S. ambassador to India. That's a big job no matter what, but boy, it just got a lot more complicated.
Yeah, a lot more complicated.
Ben, unfortunately, it's been a tough couple weeks for our friends in Canada. So last week, they welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the Canadian Parliament to deliver a speech. This was a broad effort to support Ukraine. Right? Trudeau announced a bunch of additional money. They're going to send some armored vehicles to Ukraine as part of the event in Parliament. The Speaker of the Canadian House of Commons, Anthony Rota, introduced a 98-year-old man from his district named Yaroslav Hunka, who the Speaker described as a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero. Here's a clip of that.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
The Speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized, but this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and, by extension, to all Canadians.
So that voice you heard at the end after the applause talking about the Speaker's mistake was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, because it turns out that this gentleman, you heard them applauding, fought in a volunteer unit under the command of the Nazis. Shortly before we started recording, the Speaker resigned. Ben, where do you think applauding a former member of the SS 14th Waffen Division before a speech by a Jewish president ranks on the list of the worst vetting mistakes in political history?
That's immediately vaulting up to the top 3.
When you say fought in World War II against the Russians, how do you not know immediately it's someone who fought with the Nazis?
What was the vet on this guy? Because it didn't take long for a lot of people to figure this out, right?
Instantaneous.
Because this guy was not shy about the fact that he'd been in this unit. There are other guys in that unit that ended up in Canada. It's such a degree of incompetency. Did this person, was he set up by a staff member who wanted to? Because it's literally a bunch of mild-mannered, friendly Canadians standing up and giving a standing ovation to someone who was in the SS. That's fucking crazy. That's some crazy, crazy shit,
Wasn't there an instance where, I think, was it you or Favre, somebody almost used a turn of phrase during Obama's speech at in Germany that was a famous Nazi slogan?
So just to prove, and some of you, I think maybe way back when I may have told this story, but just to prove that we could all be the Canadian speaker, right? Anybody who works in politics.
Mistakes happen.
So when Obama went to Berlin in 2008, 4 years president, he was going to address 250,000 Germans in this huge moment outside. And we drafted, Favre and I wrote the speech together. I was a speechwriter traveling. So we had the end of the speech was this great story about the American candy bombers who dropped candy to children during the Berlin airlift. And this German woman runs out in the street and yells in German, like this word that means like, we are a community of fate, right? Actually, there's one word in German that means community of fate. So we're like, oh, that's great. That's so Obama. Like, we are the ones we've been waiting for, all that. So that was the big ending, was on this line. And he was going to say it in German. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, doesn't that one word really mean community of fate? So I Google this word, and sure enough, that's what it means. But I see some Hitler references, But at first I'm kind of like, well, it's Germany. Maybe there's Hitler references. I call our Europe policy lead guy. I'm going to dime him out now because we love him. But it was Phil Gordon.
Okay.
Great dude. He's like, I don't, that doesn't ring any bells with me. I'm like, well, I'm going to call, we had an interpreter for the speech and great advanced staffer Mark Levitt, remember that guy? Mm-hmm. Is with that guy. And so I'm like, hey, does he have any concerns about this word? And the guy's like, oh my God, he's so glad you asked. He's been worried about this. This word was the theme of Hitler's first speech to the Reichstag.
Oh my God.
And I was like, will people know that? And he's like, well, German people know that,
the ones listening
and
will.
I was like, so I had to go upstairs and tell Obama 2 hours before the speech that we had to change the whole ending because I almost put in this word that was basically like a Hitler theme.
Hey man, better than telling him 2 hours after the speech.
Well, it's great that our boss, who was smoking Marlboro Reds at the time, which probably helped. But it's great that his reaction was to laugh hysterically. You know, other bosses would yell. It's actually a great Obama story that his instinct was to think that was funny. Yeah. But it does show you that even Nazis can avoid the vet.
Listen, man. Yeah, history is complicated. Words have a lot of meaning, intended or unintended, and you got to be real careful.
Rough week in Canada, though. I did when I saw that. I was like, oh, they couldn't even get the clean Zelensky visit, which otherwise was pretty cool.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to talk about the Saudi Crown Prince's interview on Fox News. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Tommy John. It's fall, which means you should be picking apples, not wedgies. Get new underwear that'll take care of your whole fruit basket. That's Tommy John. When you wear Tommy John, you're that much more comfortable, so you can do everything better. Tommy John underwear and loungewear have dozens of comfort innovations. It's breathable, lightweight, moisture-wicking fabric with 4 times the stretch of competing brands that keep you comfortable no matter what the season throws at you. With over 20 million pairs sold and thousands of 5-star reviews, guys across America love their Tommy Johns because there's no flopping, sticking, or chafing. That's why Tommy John doesn't just have customers. They've got fanatics. One such fanatic raves the most comfortable boxer briefs ever. There's no downside. Buy one pair and you'll never want to wear any other underwear again. We love Tommy John. Been wearing their underwear for years. They have all sorts of great products. Good lounge pants. That are very
I love the
comfortable.
lounge pants.
Yeah,
they're so soft.
Super, super soft and comfortable. Highly recommend them. And you will love Tommy John too. You're always covered with the Tommy John best pair you'll ever wear or its free guarantee. Get 20% off your first order right now at TommyJohn.com/world. That's 20%. You save 20% at TommyJohn.com/world. TommyJohn.com/world. See site for details. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You guys ever lay in bed at night, you got those racing thoughts keeping you up or waking you up early?
Always.
Preventing you from feeling joy?
Yeah. It's really speaking to me.
Do you ever find that just as you're trying to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't shut up and your thoughts are racing at other inopportune times too? It turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk through them. Therapy gives you a place to do that so you can get out of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. Listen, everybody, the world's too terrible and scary to not have therapists. Call somebody, give BetterHelp a try, talk to somebody. If you don't like it, you got nothing to lose. You just stop, but you will. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/crookedworld. Go today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/crookedworld. All right, Ben, so Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman did a sit-down interview with Bret Baier of Fox News.
That's a choice.
Yep, it is a choice to go on Fox. A very interesting one. So, I don't fully track MBS's interviews, but this was the first sit-down I've seen him do with a Western outlet since his PR tour.
The 60 Minutes thing, remember?
Through the United States in 2017. that got
Pre-Khashoggi,
him,
yeah.
this fawning, credulous coverage. And as you noted, it made a lot of reporters look very stupid after MBS ordered the execution of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. So I watched all of Brett's interview with MBS. It wasn't 2017 Tom Friedman or 60 Minutes bad. He covered a lot of ground. He asked about Khashoggi. He asked about some human rights things. But there was some bootlicking in there that was a little uncomfortable. But let's start with the biggest headline out of this interview when they talked about Iran. So here's MBS talking about what would happen if Iran got a nuclear weapon.
That means you are in a war with the rest of the world. So it's a useless effort to reach a nuclear weapon because you cannot use it. If you use it, you got to have a big fight with the rest of the world.
If they get one, will you?
If they get one, we have to get one for security reasons, for balancing power in the Middle East. But we don't want to see that.
So, Ben, I heard that, and look, I could view that as kind of a threat, or I could view it as a statement of facts, and frankly, something that Obama said many times, which is if Iran got a nuclear weapon, it would start an arms race in the Middle East. Yeah. How did you receive that?
I received it as a statement of fact. I mean, first of all, like they, as always, could have supported the Iran deal, and then you wouldn't have to be having this conversation. Yeah. So that's endlessly frustrating that he and Bibi, these guys that actively undermine the Iran deal, are now bitching that the Iranians are on the doorstep of a nuclear weapon that they wouldn't have been able to do. But I think it's just, look, we used to make this argument, like if Iran gets one, the Saudis will, and others. The Saudis could buy one, if they, they have so much money, they could figure out a way to buy it. I think the problematic, to use a 2023 term, piece of it is that we're in the middle of this negotiation about giving them a peaceful nuclear program, right? And so that's on the table as part of this normalization deal. And for him to just announce, we might, because it would still, they're not like legally allowed to get a nuclear weapon just because Iran gets one. That may be what happens, but like that would be in violation of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. That would be against international law. So for him to basically just say, yeah, like, if this thing happens, it very well may happen, we're just going to immediately turnkey and have a nuclear weapon. And oh, by the way, like, that'd probably be easier if the U.S. builds me a large peaceful nuclear program. Right. That's why it's messed up. Like it just is him saying out loud, yeah, it's not like this nuclear program might not just be about like peaceful nuclear power. It's a hedge,
Yeah, that jumped out at me. I mean, the same interview, they talk about this normalization deal a bunch. And, also, Brett Baier in the piece talks about MBS's efforts to make peace with the Iranians. The deals were brokered by the Chinese in a way that's like, it's not fawning, but it's sort of like, he's sort of praising him. But out of the other side of his mouth is always attacking Obama and the Iran deal.
Funny, Brett Baier wasn't as fawning over our diplomacy with Iran.
No, he was not. So just to give him shit for a minute. So Brett starts the interview by saying, a lot of people described you as a visionary leader, including many of your own people. I'm like, oh my God. He later, I think the next question
many
starts,
people are saying,
you really have become a big player on the world stage. When talking about normalization, he says, clearly you can see outside of the box on these deals. And then on Yemen, Ben, they talk, to his credit, Brett asks about the war in Yemen. But then he says, more than 150,000 people died in Yemen. It's been a big humanitarian crisis, but you all put in billions of dollars to help in that, and it doesn't get covered a lot. It's like, thank you for sending some aid to manage the humanitarian catastrophe that the Saudis caused. Wonderful. Why not cover that more?
That's so unbelievable because, like they completely created the humanitarian catastrophe. The billions they provided in humanitarian assistance is like change in the couch for the Saudis. And that also doesn't that just sound like, Brett Baier had to have multiple meetings with like MBS's flacks in order to secure this interview.
100%.
And one of those flacks, one of those like really smooth Saudi diplomat types is like, what doesn't get covered? The prince really wants to make sure that we are providing this humanitarian assistance into Yemen, and no one ever talks about it. He really liked to talk about that.
100%.
Like you can totally, good work by that flack, by the way, because he basically wrote Brett Baier's question.
Yeah, it's a 30-minute interview. Like the first part is kind of buttering him up. 17 minutes into discussion, he asks about Khashoggi, asks a follow-up, and then moves on, though he does move on to whether or not the Saudis are going to lock up someone who tweeted something nasty about the government. One thing that really bothered me, Ben, is Brett Baier is like, could you work with Bibi Netanyahu? And MBS says, look, like in Saudi Arabia, we don't interfere with who's running a country. We work with them. No pushback on that. No mention that MBS took the president of Lebanon hostage in 2017.
Like his had a
made him
hand in like
resign.
removing governments. One of the stranger episodes too, by the way. They took the prime minister of a country hostage.
And they drafted a statement for him and made him read it. It's the craziest shit I've ever seen. Brett Baer asked MBS about Biden's age. MBS is actually surprisingly complimentary. He does also ask about the Saudis investing in Jared Kushner's fund and whether it sends a bad message. He says even if there wasn't a tit for tat, it's like he sort of like takes away the sort of worst outcome. Basically, MBS says he'll leave the money in there even if Trump becomes president. So worth watching, but pretty frustrating.
Yeah, pretty frustrating. I mean, this guy has like just floated above accountability of any sort because of his money, and that's the message sent by interviews like that. I mean, I do think part of what's going on here is, look, he clearly would prefer Trump coming back.
Definitely.
But precisely because everybody knows that, he can like say some nice things about Joe Biden on Fox News. And by the way, the reason they want to do the normalization deal now is because they think that they did the deal with Trump as president, it would not get through Congress because no Democrats would vote for it. So the reason he's doing this is he wants to use Democratic votes under a Democratic president to muscle through his normalization package so he can have his nuclear program and security guarantee and then hug Trump, which is yet another reason I'd be skeptical of this deal if I was a Democrat.
I'm real skeptical of this deal. A couple more quick things before we get to Ben's interview. So we haven't talked about Niger in a while. Folks remember the presidential guard in Niger staged a coup on July 26th. They've been in control ever since. The Democratic elected president has been sitting in jail. The coup leaders told France right after it happened to get their ambassador and their 1,500 troops the hell out of the country. Initially, French President Emmanuel Macron refused, saying he would only take orders from Mohammed Bazoum, the democratically elected president. On Sunday, Macron changed his mind and he announced that France will recall its ambassador immediately and pull out all of their troops by the end of the year. France was leading this big counterterrorism coalition in the Sahel region of Africa from about 2013 to 2022. At its peak, it spanned multiple countries, and there were about 5,000 soldiers there. They've been steadily driven out. This is sort of the latest step in that process. Now, I guess we'll just see what the U.S. does.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the right call. Not that the France had a lot of maneuvering room, but as we've talked about, they need to kind of reset this entire relationship they have with their former colonies in the Sahel region of Africa, because one after another, there's a coup that basically has like anti-French sentiment as a key part of it. And so just instead of kind of trying to stay there and figure something out, like just pulling out and being like, okay, we're kind of start this over.
It's crazy that they were telling him to leave and they wouldn't do it.
I mean, that was the right thing to do.
Leave someone's country.
Yeah. I think the U.S., like, I don't know. I mean, the U.S., they haven't said the same thing to us about getting out, No,
I don't think we've called it a coup yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, personally, like, I kind of feel like we should get out of there because, we're kind of enabling in some fashion, like a pretty shitty situation. And there got to be other ways to manage like a terrorism threat from that part of the world. Feels like by 2023, we should be able to not have to be physically everywhere. I mean, this is part about dismantling forever war infrastructure. Like, are you going to keep a drone base in Niger forever? I mean, I don't think so. So, post-coup might be the time to pack it up.
Yeah, it might be the time. So, Ben, our former boss, Obama's first chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, is now the U.S. ambassador to Japan. So we worked for Rahm. He was very super high-functioning, frenetic, not afraid to break some China, not afraid to drop an F-bomb or piss people off, make some enemies.
Unabashed neo-lib, too.
Unabashed neo-lib. Yeah. That reputation made Rahm's selection as an ambassador a little bit surprising to some people.
Especially to like a incredibly structured and polite kind of society.
Well, it's funny. I do think part of that is part of the confusion. Some of it is an assumption that ambassadors are polished and diplomatic.
Yeah.
I do think sometimes countries want ambassadors that just are perceived as having power and access, and like Rahm certainly fits that bill. I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, NBC News reported that the White House had to scold Rahm Emanuel for sending a bunch of tweets that taunted Chinese President Xi Jinping because they were worried they might undermine efforts to improve relations between the U.S. and China. So the White House denied this happened on the record. Kirk Campbell, who was on the show a couple weeks back, has this like glowing quote about Rahm.
I bet. Probably dictated by Rahm.
Probably, yeah. I talked to some folks in the administration who said, look, they're doing their job and pushing back on a story that annoyed people. But they said they think Rahm's doing a pretty good job, but he certainly seems to have pissed off some folks at the State Department, some professional diplomats.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Regardless, there is no doubt in my mind that if back in 2009 we were sitting in the White House and our ambassador to Japan started popping off on the Chinese president on Twitter,
Rahm Emanuel
Rahm would have ripped him a new asshole, him or her, right? So, but I guess my question to you is like, there has been this change in diplomacy starting, sort of the Xi Jinping area, these sort of so-called wolf warrior diplomats who are lots of Chinese officials who talk shit on social media all day, every day for a living about the U.S. in particular. Do we think any of this really matters given that change? Or like, I don't know, how big of a concern would you have about Rahm, popping off about, the missing Chinese foreign minister and defense minister on Twitter?
I mean, first of all, it's just funny that Rahm is an ambassador. Who, by the way, he had like the strangest. People are always like, did he curse a lot? And yeah, the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. But it was always been the strangest way to be like, get me the Secretary of Motherfucking Agriculture. And it's like, what? Why? Like, why is that guy a motherfucker? Like, it was just kind of random cursing, So I'm trying to picture that in Japan. On the other thing about the Xi Jinping stuff is like Biden goes to these like fundraisers and he'll be like, I wouldn't want to be Xi Jinping, that loser. like Biden is constantly like throwing haymakers at Xi Jinping.
That's true.
So maybe Rahm kind of felt like he had the top cover in this one.
Yeah, he's got talk points.
As a general matter, I'm a supporter of diplomats and ambassadors and U.S. government officials sounding like normal human beings. Okay?
Shitposting?
I mean, it probably doesn't have to be through shitposting, but like, I'd really like, and I've said this, I'll say this publicly, I've said it privately to everybody, from Tony Blinken on down, like the talking points, that we kind of live by in foreign policy, no human being sounds like that. No human being says words like, today we reaffirmed and deepened the partnership, but blah, blah, blah. Like it's not how human beings talk. So I am a fan of ambassadors and people generally in the U.S. government sounding like human beings. And if that means they're going to throw a little shade at Xi Jinping from time to time, like, I think that's fine. I think you don't want the wolf warrior stuff that the Chinese do. The reason I think that's too much is it makes you kind of look weak. It's kind of crazed. It's like this deranged rants about America. And like, it doesn't, it sounds thin-skinned,
Yeah, that's true. I guess I'm with you. I just kind of find the whole thing funny.
It's fun. I find the whole thing funny. I mean, just picture Rahm like firing off like, dunks on the Chinese foreign minister.
Yeah, and like some poor assistant secretary of state for Asia waking up and reading and what the hell, man?
Dan Crittenbrink, man, like one of the best guys in the U.S. government.
Just be like, this guy works for me. This guy works for my underlings, and he's just like popping off. On
Dan Crittenbrink, he was after you. He replaced Danny Russell as assistant secretary. He's the most. Like, he's from Nebraska, wholesome, wonderful guy. So like Rahm is probably like totally off his sensibilities in a number of ways.
Rahm in the State Department, it's an interesting culture fit.
Yeah.
That's when they say. Final story, Ben. A New Zealand couple was awarded $1,400 in compensation from the Singapore Airlines after they were forced to leave their premium seats and move to economy seats because they were seated next to a loud farting dog. This was a 13-hour flight from Paris to Singapore. According to People magazine, my source here, the trouble began after the dinner service, as it often does. The dog was a bulldog mix. Oh. Apparently the dog, it was like underneath the owner's seat, but it's sort of, I think, butt was kind of angled under the neighbor's seat. You know what happens next. So this couple fought for the money. They said they'll donate it to a New Zealand-based charity that matches visually impaired people with service dogs. So all's well that ends well.
I have questions there. Did the dog eat the dinner? Is that the assumption that the dog had like the Singapore Air, like, because it's actually good dinner on Singapore Air.
They have good food?
But maybe if the dog's eating like some spicy noodles or something, that's not going to be good.
Yeah, if you're giving him some sort of like heavily sauced microwave chicken.
That's not what you want.
That'll do it.
Did you see, I'm sure you did, the diarrhea plane?
Oh, God.
Yeah. I mean,
did I ever?
It's kind of, because it kind of, this calls it to mind because I imagine if this dog like ate the microwave chicken dinner, it wasn't just the people sitting right there that are going to be impacted by what this dog was doing. I mean, these New Zealanders were like on the front lines, but there's some fucking people right behind them probably didn't appreciate that
they're
either.
in the trenches.
Yeah. It's like snakes on a plane or something.
13-hour flight. I mean, how's it? The dog supposed to hold it that whole time? That's a really long flight for an animal.
That's a very good question. Like, what do you do with like animals on 13-hour flights?
I mean, so I've taken my dog on 6 or 7-hour flights, even when she was a puppy, and we brought like pee pads and tried to get her to go in the bathroom. Sometimes she would, sometimes she would. I mean, they can hold it a shockingly long time, but 13 hours is a lot.
Yeah. God.
That's a lot. Now, when we got Luca, we flew with her a couple weeks after we got her, so she's probably like 10 or 12 weeks, and we were sitting Southwest, and basically like someone saw me in the window seat, Hannah in the middle, and then like an open aisle seat next to like, Hannah's small, so you have you're not fighting for the armrest.
Yeah.
And this younger woman comes and sits down, and then she sees that we have our little like 12-week-old puppy on the tray table, just like racked out sleeping.
Yeah.
The best day of her life. Just
Yeah.
get to pet her the whole time. No farting though.
That's a good seat. You get to be next to Hannah and a puppy.
Yeah, you get lots of arm room.
It's a lot of happy time.
But so I guess no 13-hour flights. Just don't feed the dogs the people food on the flights, I think is the...
That's what we can take away from this. That's what we can take away from this.
We learned from this. Okay, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, you will hear Ben's interview about what's going on in Nagorno-Karabakh. So stick around for that. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Factor. With all the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days.
Another fall.
Yeah, we are the pumpkin spice of ad read sessions. Factor, it's America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. It can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, you'll eat well, and you'll stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. If you're too busy this fall to cook, but want to make sure you're eating well, get Factor. You can skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, and then get back to crushing your goals. That's what it says here. Adjust your stride this autumn without missing a step. Choose from 34-plus weekly flavor-packed, fresh, never-frozen meals ready to eat in 2 minutes. Level up with Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. John, you're a huge Factor fan, right?
I had Factor before. I've had it for years. And the meals are always delicious, super fast to prepare. The food is like very high quality. The Gourmet Plus option is great because, like, say you want some breakfast and not just the dinner and lunches. They have some like great egg stuff, some pancakes.
All right, you're selling
fantastic.
Me. They got a blackened salmon, garlic and herb chicken breast, shredded chicken taco bowl. These all sound very good. Head to factormeals.com/crookedworld50 and use code crookedworld50 to get 50% off. That's crookedworld50 at factormeals.com/crookedworld50 to get 50% off. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Simply Safe. Well, it's official. Fall is here. It's a real theme.
Yeah,
really
getting into the
hard
fall.
Here. If you're like me, you're settling back into your busier routines with the kids at school and spare time filled with soccer practices and seasonal activities.
Was he doing soccer practice yet?
She loves seasonal activities. Your home may be sitting empty and vulnerable. That's why I recommend Simply Safe Home Security and their revolutionary home monitoring innovation, 24/7 live guard protection. It's designed to help stop crime in real time. Now, if an intruder breaks into your home, Simply Safe professional monitoring agents can actually see, speak to, and deter them through Simply Safe's new Smart Alarm wireless indoor camera. That is why we love Simply Safe. John Lovett set up a Simply Safe himself. It was easy to do.
He's been bragging about it for years.
It's kept him safe. It's really high-tech sensors, but it's easy to use, all from an app on your phone. He highly, highly recommends it. The 24/7 live guard protection is made possible by the new Smart Alarm wireless indoor camera, which is available with Fast Protect monitoring. The new Smart Alarm indoor camera is the only security camera that can trigger the alarm and instantly deter intruders with the built-in siren. It is a physical privacy shutter to provide protection when you need it and privacy when you don't. The 24/7 live guard protection in the new Smart Alarm indoor camera works seamlessly as part of the Simply Safe system to keep your whole home safe from break-ins, fires, floods, and more. Install your way. Do it yourself in about 30 minutes or have Simply Safe experts set it up for you. Either way, It's easy to protect your home. For a limited time, get 20% off your new system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Visit simplysafe.com/crookedworld. That's simplysafe.com/crookedworld. There's no safe like SimpliSafe.
We are very pleased to welcome back to Pod Save the World Olesya Vartanyan, who is a senior analyst for the South Caucasus at the International Crisis Group. We've had Olesya on in the past to talk about the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. As we talked about at the beginning of the show, we've had a significant deterioration there with Azerbaijan seizing control of the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region, leading to thousands, if not tens of thousands, of ethnic Armenians fleeing their homes, literally, to try to reach Armenia's borders. And so she's here to help us understand what's happening and where things might be going now. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to join you, but I wish we could have a different reason to have this conversation.
I know. So do I. And it's just kind of been a heartbreaking turn of events. I mean, to begin with, describe for our listeners what has just happened, and why, from your understanding, did this just happen now? So in other words, this has been a disputed territory for so long. Why does it seem like Azerbaijan has now made its move to kind of swallow up this region and displace, if not ethnically cleanse, all of these people?
It was mid of the day, September 19, when Azerbaijan started a military operation in Nagorno-Karabakh. It took them very little, almost like it was a matter of hours, for the Azerbaijani troops to destroy what the local Armenians call their own army, and they took control of the main roads that are connecting Stepanakert, which is the main town with enclave with the rest of the region. The capital, the main town, got encircled by the Azerbaijani troops. The local authorities right away, almost immediately, started calling for the ceasefire. And it took most of the time of this military operation that lasted officially for 1 day. But in fact, everything was more or less done within a couple of hours. But most of the time, it went only for the local authorities and the Azerbaijani government to basically decide how to proceed with the ceasefire, because Azerbaijan was asking not just for the dismantlement, of the local military troops, but also they wanted to see that the local government basically announcing that they don't exist anymore. But then there was a question, who would be responsible, right? For implementation of the ceasefire statement. And so it took this long, 1 day, just because they were busy clarifying how to proceed with the demands that Azerbaijan posed and the local authorities agreed to right away. When the announcement came, when the de facto authorities said that the ceasefire was agreed, it led to enormous panic among the local population. Around 100,000 people, they were on the ground. Thousands were already displaced by the fighting that was taking place. But, right away, people just started walking in all different directions, trying to find any kind of cover, because they were all afraid that the Azerbaijani troops know where to start entering their villages and towns, and that would lead to certain violence, tensions, massacres, and all of that. Many of these people, they were walking kilometers, including very old people and also mothers with kids, just to find a cover at the bases and compounds of the Russian peacekeepers. So at some point, all these people, they found themselves in an open sky without any kind of food, without any kind of belongings, many without any kind of documents, and then with no clarity about the future. It took Azerbaijan about 2 days to agree to opening the road, the only road that connects Nagorno-Karabakh with the region to Armenia. And the moment it happened, we started seeing rivers of cars. All the people started moving towards Armenia, and it is still going on. Azerbaijani bodyguards that are stationed at the border with Armenia, they're checking every single car, and because of that, people spend over a day just moving along this road that normally should take a couple of hours. And the first people now are here in Armenia. Today, almost 50,000 people already got registered. I spoke to several people who I know very well. None of them registered, so I would probably expect a bigger number. I mean, of those who is coming, many more are still on the move. They are packing. There are also people who are still looking for diesel or petrol or some lifts, some buses. I have a feeling that in the coming days, this region will become almost empty. So maybe there will be some people who will decide to stay, and this is their choice. But the majority, they don't see their future in Nagorno-Karabakh anymore, unfortunately.
I mean, that's a really astonishing and heartbreaking picture that you just painted. And what part of what is so astonishing, I think, to some people is that this has been a kind of frozen conflict for decades, with roughly 150,000 Armenians living in this space. When you step back and consider why did this happen so fast? We saw President Aliyev of Azerbaijan with Erdogan the other day. Clearly, his deep relationship with Turkey and the military assistance he's gotten has improved their capabilities. The Russians have generally been in the corner of Armenia, and Russian peacekeepers were kind of relied upon to enforce this status quo around Nagorno-Karabakh. Clearly, Russia's been distracted by the war in Ukraine. Or you just have a world in which, big countries are doing this to smaller countries, as Russia's doing in Ukraine. I mean, why do you think this happened now in a way that it hasn't happened for decades? Why was Azerbaijan both willing and able to do this so quickly?
So look, the first change, it came in 2020. Almost exactly 3 years ago. Then Azerbaijan started with military operation. The world was busy with pandemic. The US was having elections. Trump's administration, they did not really care about this part of the world altogether. And it took them 6 weeks. The Azerbaijani forces, they captured most of the conflict zone, including parts of Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenian army was absolutely destroyed. It was basically the locals that were left at the mercy of the Russian peacekeepers. And at that time, Moscow decided to station them in Nagorno-Karabakh for at least 5 days. And everything was more or less okay, I should say. I mean, there were the people who were telling me that they don't like certain things, especially that the military troops are next door, they can see them from their windows, that they don't feel safe about their kids. And Nagorno-Karabakh became much more isolated because there were no more people from outside world traveling there. Some restrictions were imposed and all of that. But still, life went on. But the moment Russia started the invasion of Ukraine, everything started, it all started changing on the ground, and people felt it there right away. Azerbaijan could feel right away also very well, that Russia would never really start opening the second front. They were busy in Ukraine. And then Azerbaijan started making use of its military might. Also, the fact that Russia is either distracted, doesn't want to get involved, or just kind of prefers not to see what's happening, both with Nagorno-Karabakh, but also at the border with Armenia and Azerbaijan. And there were many attempts, robust attempts, I should say, made by the European Union and also by the current administration of the United States. And I would say that they did everything possible. And the fact that we had this military operation only now, it's just because they got involved and they were going after with officials in Armenia and Azerbaijan. They were making all these offers. There were calls. I had a feeling in August that the people, just always foreign diplomats, they didn't have a vacation just because they were going after Armenia and Azerbaijan all the time. With negotiations that started between Armenia and Azerbaijan on the peace treaty, they were promising in a way that they were offering some prospect for peace, at least the stability during this difficult period when Russia is in Ukraine. Everyone is also from outside world there trying to respond to what's happening there. But we still reached this point when it was necessary for Azerbaijan to go for some softer stance, and probably concede on some of its positions when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh. So, for example, the United States and the European Union, they were offering to launch the negotiations between Baku and Stepanakert, de facto authorities and Azerbaijani officials, on the future of enclave, so that they sit down and discuss how this reintegration starts happening. And then with de facto authorities agreed, they started developing their papers, like position, agenda, and there were 2 attempts to make it happen. American officials were to take both de facto official and Azerbaijani representatives to Europe for a meeting. First time it was disrupted by the leaks to the Russian media. The second time we saw Russian Foreign Ministry making all different offers to Azerbaijan that were much more attractive than what the US was suggesting. Yeah. To me, when it happened in July, and in June and July, it was clear that we were doomed for escalation, to be honest. Yeah. It was just a matter of time of when it was to happen. But still, all these people, they spend their summer going after with Azerbaijani Armenian officials. We had the most senior people from Brussels and Washington, D.C. calling. And I understand that, for example, Secretary Blinken spoke to Aliyev, and one of my sources at the US administration told me that they even discussed the possibility of sanctions in case this military operation happens. European official who is involved in all of that also confirmed that President Aliyev personally promised not to go for this kind of military operation. And then they saw this happening when with UN General Assembly, with annual thing was happening, when all these people were together in New York. It was much more than anyone could expect. On the one hand, the fighting that everyone knew what it would bring, but on the other is also how it was done, despite all the promises and the UNGA happening.
Yeah, it's almost like they wanted people to know, to watch, that they didn't care, that Azerbaijan's a stronger party now and they're going to do what they want. I mean, so you paint a picture of pretty intense diplomatic activity. The Armenian American community here is understandably upset, and I think the mood is that they would have liked the U.S. to do more. They would have liked the U.S. to cut off any military assistance to Azerbaijan earlier. They would have liked sanctions. What more do you think? History is over, but this is still an ongoing situation. Azerbaijan is still threatening maybe even further encroachments into Armenia. What do you think the United States can and should be doing now to support Armenia as it deals with not only these people coming in, but continued threats from Azerbaijan?
Look, Azerbaijan is not very easy to work with. It's not like Washington D.C. call them and then they in Azerbaijan right away start doing the thing. So I mean, you have to work with them, and then I perfectly understand all these people who are so much frustrated. The administrator of the USAID, Samantha Power, she is now in Armenia, and she constantly has to respond to these very questions. You promised us that that this is a red line. You told us that you would respond. Where is your help? We don't need your money. Why didn't you help us? And then I don't want even to imagine what these people have to go through. But on the other hand, these are legit questions. In fact, we have this situation when this work could happen a year ago with the US and EU involvement and all of that. I know that does not necessarily mean that everyone knows that. Yeah. And then people are very much frustrated with the fact that Russian peacekeepers just packed and left, their observation points. And they are now the only force on the ground, and there is no prospect for changing them or even adding anything. So you really have to look at this situation and then think about some sober approach and stance there. And I would say that the biggest and the most important priority now, I know that people will not like what I'm going to say, but it's still for Armenia and Azerbaijan to proceed with the peace talks. There are two very important things for them still to discuss. It's one is the delimitation of the border, and the second is the transportation roads. Both of them, they have to do with security of Armenia. If Azerbaijan now says no to the US and EU mediation on these two important points, Armenia is left with only choice to go for these discussions with the Russian mediation. And then Russia does not really keep its back, and even more on some of these issues, we know that Russia supports Azerbaijan position. And so in a way, this is kind of a situation when, this is a bad choice, but you have to think about some worse things that can happen if you don't go for that.
And this is because, just so people know, essentially there's a part of Azerbaijan that is still cut off, right, by Armenian territory. And so the worst case scenario would be Azerbaijan taking more of Armenia's territory in order to create a kind of land bridge, which is eerily familiar to Ukraine. So yes, this is still very much not over. So you're in Yerevan. What is the mood there? I mean, I've been struck by there's both the sense of loss of this territory that really intense war was fought over at the end of the Soviet Union. Obviously, the ethnic Armenians and Christians in that territory, basically being ethnically cleansed. But also, you have the historical memory of genocide in Armenians. It feels like makes this kind of trauma even more intense. And this sense of insecurity, as you said, it's just surrounded by these countries that seem hostile to its interests. I mean, what is the mood in Yerevan right now?
I think many people are lost because it was very fast, and right away you now see with people are, the locals, they are sorry about what happened, but at the same time I don't see anyone who wants to get into the fighting, there are those who are criticizing, for example, the Armenian leadership for their decision not to interfere into the fighting. People like me understand very well that it would be a very short fight even for Armenia itself, just because it doesn't really have an army and it doesn't have a backing of Russia. It's a kind of formal military alliance. So it was not something that Armenia could afford at all. But there were some protests. And then, to be honest, when I went to see these protests, I could not really feel that they were something that could bring a major change. Like I was sitting, for example, I was meeting one of the EU officials and at a cafe, and nearby was protesters were passing and they were shouting on those standing at the streets, "Come and join us." And right away, those are, "No, we're not going to do," and some swearing words, So it's from the very beginning, to me, it was clear that the protests, they have a chance, but little potential. It can change. It can change in case of with humanitarian crisis that Armenia might face, just because it now has to find housing and integrate a huge number of people who are different, who speak a different language. They are Armenians, but they are not local Armenians. It's still a very difficult task. And the second also, if, for example, some new escalation incidents start taking place at the border, that's also something that will undermine the Armenian leadership. And look, the winter is coming. Russia is the one that is providing natural gas to Armenia. Russia is the one that provides also the market. And when we know very well, when there are some political problems, right away there can be some issues with, for example, some explosions on the pipeline, or there can be problems with some, quality of some of the Armenian products that are to enter the Russian market. So, it's okay for the moment. It's more or less stable. People are watching. They are sorry, but what is to come? I think everyone is really very afraid of with next weeks and then months that are to come.
Yeah, I bet. But I think you really appropriately reminded us that this isn't over yet. There's going to need to be a lot of assistance for those 150,000 people, assuming that's how many people come. We're talking about a country, Armenia, of less than 3 million people, so that's an enormous influx. There's a risk of continued conflict, the need for U.S. and European assistance remains very high, even if the frustration with how Nagorno-Karabakh has played out is understandable. The last thing I just wanted to ask you, what have you heard about this explosion that took place at like a fuel depot where people are fleeing? It just seems to. Does that feel like a natural, like an accident, or do people feel like this is further efforts to sabotage and kind of humiliate or punish Armenians on the way out?
I spoke to some people who told me, who are still on the ground, who told me that they don't really have a reason to believe that was something that was prepared by someone. Yeah. So. Yeah. I probably have to explain that Nagorno-Karabakh has been living with this blockade imposed by Azerbaijan for over 9 months. By the time of the military operation, there were very huge problems with food, but also petrol, diesel. And when people saw that the road was open between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia, then right away you could see them running around the town and then in a search of this, petrol that either Russian peacekeepers delivered or some said Azerbaijan delivered. No one cared. It was unfortunate. It was a very unfortunate incident when people were in a rush and they were trying to get petrol and diesel just to get out of Nagorno-Karabakh because they are so much terrified. I don't know. I spoke to some people, who have been packing yesterday, and the feeling that I have is that they don't really have a hope that they will go back. Like, for example, one woman, she was burning. She packed some of her belongings, not much. But still, she was burning like family photos, and she kept the door open just because she thought that those who were to come and to live at her apartment, they should probably enter, a nice place. I heard that some others also telling me that they were cleaning their houses because, there is this kind of feeling saying that if you are abandoning your house, the new host should come to the clean place. It all sounds terrible, and but also for those who not just now have to start a new life, but also just because in this military operation, many also lost their sons and husbands. The majority of those who died, they were military, but these were military who were also at the same time local residents. And then there are still those who are trying to find the corpses and the remains of their beloved ones, and then still kind of trying to keep this petrol and diesel next to them. And of course, with explosion, it was like an additional tragedy just because people were trying to flee, and suddenly this happened, and you got like almost 300 people injured. Some of them really very badly, and over 20 killed. So it's like an additional thing when you absolutely lose any kind of hope for a better future, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, look, we really appreciate you coming on and helping us understand what's happening there. Everybody should follow the International Crisis Group's work. Is usually the very best analysis of these kind of conflict zones. And people should follow you, Olesya, on social media. We'll point people in that direction. So thanks so much, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Olesya Vartanyan for joining the show. No thank you to Mac Jones or your guy, Zach.
No, I will say thank you to friend of the pod, Andy Kim.
Oh, yeah? He might
throwing his hat in the ring against Menendez. So
this is hard.
We'll have to,
Everyone loves Andy Kim.
Yeah.
I'm excited for him to run. I bet it's going to be a crowded primary, and people get real pissed off in Democratic primaries.
Yeah,
as we all learned in 2020. We'll see. But I do hope that Menendez resigns and someone can replace him.
Yeah, that would be. I'm not holding my breath on that one, but we'll see.
That guy. I just want to be clear. As I said on Pod to America, I thought that guy sucked before. It was cool.
Yeah, so did I. I have a long record. We have a pretty good track record. I mean, if you've been listening, let's say you picked this show up in 2018, you would have known how much we thought Jared Kushner sucked, Bibi Netanyahu sucked, MBS sucked, Bob Menendez. I feel like we've basically been proven. We may not be right about all of our prescriptions for things, but I think our antenna for who sucks the most is pretty spot on.
I think that's right. I do think all of those people would be pleased to be bucketed together.
Yeah. That's fair. That's true. They all like get the last laugh somehow.
Yeah. Listen, great show. Thanks everybody for listening, and talk to you next week.
Yeah.